Welcome to the Ultimate Sports Blog Podcast. Today is Saturday, March 10th, 2018. Today we're going to recap all the college basketball action, make picks for today's big games, go over two firings among college basketball. One of them happened the other day, and one of them is just breaking news right now. I'll recap the NBA from last night and look ahead to tonight and make a prediction for Saturday primetime tonight. Go over some big-time NFL trades and much more. All right, yesterday, a ton of fun games. Cincinnati defeated SMU 61-51 to advance to the AAC semifinals. Kyle Washington put up 15 in the win, and Jamal McMurray put up 17 in defeat. I had Cincinnati on the podcast. Rhode Island defeated VCU by a score of 76-67 in the A10 quarterfinal. As Rhode Island advances to the semifinals, Jeff Dowden put up 18 in the win. Justin Tillman put up 23 in the loss, and I had Rhode Island on the podcast. Louisiana defeated Texas State by a score of 80-54 in the Sun Belt quarterfinal. Frank Bartley had 23 in the win, and Nigel Pearson put up 14 in defeat. UL Lafayette advances to the semifinal, and I had UL Lafayette on the podcast. Impressive win for the Tide of Alabama as they defeated Auburn 81-63 in the SEC quarterfinals. The Tide advanced to the semifinals. Colin Sexton was amazing, 31 points in the win. Mustafa Haran put up 18 in defeat. I had Alabama on the podcast. Not only did I have Alabama on the podcast, but on my SEC Tournament Predictions podcast, I had Alabama defeating Auburn as well. Marshall defeated Southern Miss by a score of 85-75 in the CUSA semifinals. Marshall advances to the CUSA title game. John Elmore put up 26 in the win, and Cortez Edwards put up 30 in defeat. Memphis defeated Tulsa by a score of 67-64 in the AAC quarterfinal at the buzzer beater by Kareem Bruton. It was a one-handed three-pointer at the buzzer. It was incredible. Memphis advances to the semifinals. Corey Henderson Jr. put up 20 in defeat for Tulsa, and Kareem Bruton Jr. put up 15 in the win. For Memphis, I had Tulsa on the podcast. I was wrong. St. Joe's defeated George Mason by a score of 68-49 in the A10 quarterfinal. St. Joe's advances to the semis. Nick Robinson put up 14 in the win. Jair Greer put up 12 in defeat. I had St. Joe's on the podcast. Kentucky defeated Georgia by a score of 62-49 in the SEC quarterfinal. P.J. Washington put up 18 in the win, and Tyreek Crump put up 17 in defeat. Kentucky advances to the SEC semifinal. I had Kentucky on the podcast. UT Arlington defeated Appalachian State by a score of 84-68 in the Sun Belt quarterfinal. UT Arlington advances to the semis. Eric Neal put up 37 in the win. Griffin Kinney put up 22 in defeat. I had UT Arlington on the podcast. Arkansas's Pine Bluff defeated Southern by a score of 71-65 in the SWAC semifinal. Yes, Martavius McKnight put up 28 in the win, and Eddie Reese put up 17 in defeat. As Pine Bluff advances to the title game, and I had Southern on the podcast. I was wrong. Western Kentucky defeated Old Dominion by a score of 57-49 in the CUSA semifinals. Western Kentucky advances to the championship game of the CUSA. Justin Johnson put up 19 in the win, and Trey Porter put up 17 in defeat. I had Western Kentucky on the podcast. St. Bonaventure defeated Richmond by a score of 83-77 in the A10 quarterfinal. Matt Mobley put up 29 in the win. Kawan Ford put up 25 in defeat. I had St. Bonaventure on the podcast as they advanced to the A10 semifinal. Georgia State defeated Troy by a score of 73-51 in the Sun Belt quarterfinal. Jeff Thomas put up 19 in the win. Jordan Vardano put up 15 in defeat. Georgia State advances to the semifinals of the Sun Belt, and I had Georgia State on the podcast. SC Louisiana defeated Sam Houston by a score of 89-79 in the Southland semifinal. Southeastern Louisiana advances to the championship game of the Southland. Marley and Veal put up 29 in the win, and John Dewey put up 15 in defeat. I had Southeastern Louisiana on the podcast. Hampton defeated NCAT 96-86 in the MEAC semifinals. Hampton advances to the MEAC title game. Malik Trent Street had 25 in the win, and Femi Olagobi had 22 in defeat. I had Hampton on the podcast. Providence upset Xavier by a score of 75-72 in overtime in the Big East semifinal. This probably cost Xavier a chance at a 1 seed. Good for Providence. They probably move up a seed line for this win, and they're definitely in the field now with this win. Rodney Bullock put up 17 in the win. Kareem Cantor put up 18 in defeat. I had Xavier on the podcast. I was incorrect. Buffalo defeated Kent State by a score of 78-61 in the Mid-American semifinal. Buffalo's headed to the Mid-American title game. Jeremy Harris put up 22 in the win, and Jalen Avery put up 16 in defeat, and I had the Bulls on my podcast. Wichita State defeated Temple by a score of 89-81 in the AAC quarterfinal. Wichita advances to the semis. Landry Shamet put up 24 in the win. Quentin Rose put up 25 in defeat. Temple's probably headed for the NIT. I had Wichita State on the podcast. Virginia defeated Clemson by a score of 64-58 in the ACC semifinal. This was a close game. Give Clemson credit for hanging around. Virginia's headed for the number 1 overall seed at this point. It's a lock. Kyle Guy put up 15 in the win, and Sheldon Mitchell put up 18 in defeat. And Clemson's probably headed for the 4 or 5 line. I had Virginia on the podcast. Tennessee defeated Mississippi State 62-59 in a close one in the SEC quarterfinal. Mississippi State's probably headed for the NIT. Lamonte Turner put up 15 in the win. Lamar Peters put up 22 in defeat. I had Tennessee on the podcast. They are probably headed for a 3 seed by now with the trip to the semifinals. And depending on how today's game plays out, which I'll pick later on the podcast. Kansas defeated Kansas State by a score of 83-67 in the Big 12 semifinal. Kansas is probably headed for a 1 seed. Malik Newman put up 22 in the win, and McCall Maywin put up 29 in defeat. And I had Kansas on the podcast. Davidson defeated St. Louis by a score of 78-60 in the A-10 quarterfinal. As Davidson advances to the semis, Peyton Aldridge put up 35 in the win. DeVell Roby put up 26 in defeat, and I had Davidson on the podcast. Georgia Southern defeated UL Monroe by a score of 63-55 in the Sun Belt quarterfinal. Georgia Southern advances to the semis. Tukey Brown put up 13 in the win. Sam McDaniel put up 13 in defeat, and I had Georgia Southern on the podcast. Stephen F. Austin defeated Nichols by a score of 78-66 in the Southland semifinal. Stephen F. Austin advances to the Southland title game. Shannon Bogues put up 27 in the win. Roddy Peters put up 26 in defeat. I had Stephen F. Austin on the podcast. NC Central defeated Morgan State by a score of 79-70 in the MEAC semifinal. NC Central moves on to the conference title game. Rashawn Davis put up 22 in the win, and Tevion Kenley put up 30 in defeat. And I had NC Central on the podcast. Montana defeated Northern Colorado 91-89 in overtime in the Big Sky semifinal. Montana advances to the Big Sky title game. Michael Oguni put up 19 in the win, and Andre Speet put up 22 in defeat. And I had Montana on the podcast. Arizona defeated UCLA 78-67 in overtime in the Pac-12 semifinal. UCLA did not score in overtime in this game, but they are probably headed to the big dance anyway. A bunch of good wins on their resume, and 11 losses is meh, but they'll probably still make the big dance. DeAndre Ayton put up 32 in the win. Thomas Welsh put up 17 in defeat, and I had Arizona on the podcast. Toledo defeated Eastern Michigan by a score of 64-63 in the Mid-American semifinal. Marion Jackson put up 26 in the win. Paul Jackson put up 26 in defeat. And I had Eastern Michigan on the podcast. I was wrong. And all these picks that I got wrong were close games. So there's a chance that I could have done better than my 31-11 mark from yesterday. And On to continue with the picks. Grand Canyon defeated Utah Valley by a score of 75-60 in the WAC semifinal. I had Utah Valley on the podcast. I was incorrect. Akolda Maniang put up 18 in defeat, and Alessandro Lavere put up 15 in the win. And good for Grand Canyon as they move on to the Western Athletic Conference Championship game, which I'll pick later in this podcast. Big upset in the Mountain West Conference. San Diego State knocked off Nevada 90-73 in the Mountain West semifinals. Devin Watson put up 20 in the win. Jordan Caroline put up 25 in defeat. I had Nevada on the podcast. I was wrong. Villanova defeated Butler by a score of 87-68 in the Big East semifinals. I had Villanova on the podcast. Mikal Bridges put up 18 in the win. Kalon Martin put up 13 in defeat. I still think Butler's headed to the big dance. Villanova's headed for a 1 seed. Cal State Fullerton defeated UC Davis by a score of 55-52 in the Big West semifinals. And Cal State Fullerton moves on to the Big West Championship game. Jackson Rowe put up 16 in the win. A.J. John put up 13 in defeat. I had UC Davis on the podcast. I was wrong. Texas Southern defeated Prairie View A&M by a score of 88-74 in the SWAC semifinal. Dante Clark put up 22 in the win, and Gary Blackstone put up 32 in defeat as Texas Southern advances to the SWAC championship game. I had Prairie View A&M on the podcast. I was incorrect. North Carolina defeated Duke by a score of 74-69 in the ACC semifinal. Carolina had the big lead. Duke came back to make it interesting. Give Carolina credit for holding on to advance to the ACC championship game, which I'll pick tonight, or the game will be tonight. I'll pick that later on in the podcast. Luke May put up 17 in the win and carried Trent Jr. put up 20 in defeat. I had Duke on the podcast. I was incorrect. Houston defeated UCF by a score of 84-56 in the AAC quarterfinal. Galen Robinson Jr. put up 18 in the win, and B.J. Taylor put up 20 in defeat. I had Houston on the podcast. Arkansas defeated Florida by a score of 80-72 in the SEC quarterfinal. Great win for Arkansas. Jalen Barford put up 27 in the win. Keith Stone put up 22 in defeat. As Arkansas advances to the semifinal, I had Florida on the podcast. I was wrong. West Virginia defeated Texas Tech by a score of 66-63 in the Big 12 semifinal. West Virginia advances to the Big 12 championship game. Dexter Miles put up 22 in the win, and Jarrett Culver put up 16 in the defeat. And I had the Mountaineers on the podcast. Eastern Washington defeated Southern Utah by a score of 82-70 in the Big Sky semifinal. Bogdan Bolizniak put up 32 in the win. Jadon Coey put up 15 in defeat as Eastern Washington advances to the Big Sky championship game. I had Eastern Washington on the podcast. New Mexico State defeated Seattle by a score of 84-79 in the Western Athletic Conference semifinal. New Mexico advances to the championship game. Zach Lofton put up 31 in the win. Jordan Hill put up 23 in defeat. And I had New Mexico State on the podcast. New Mexico defeated Utah State by a score of 83-68 in the Mountain West semifinal. New Mexico advances to the Mountain West Championship game. Troy Simons put up 17 in the win. Sam Morrell put up 17 in defeat. I had New Mexico on the podcast. USC defeated Oregon by a score of 74-54 in the Pac-12 semifinal. USC advances to the Pac-12 championship game. Jonah Matthews put up 27 in the win. Mikhail McIntosh put up 21 in defeat, and Oregon is right there on the bubble in my mind. UC Irvine defeated UC Santa Barbara by a score of 61-58 in the Big West semifinal. Good for Irvine for pulling off the upset. They advanced to the championship game. Max Hazard put up 16 in the win, and Max Heidegger put up 18 in defeat. Great season for UC Santa Barbara. I had them winning this game on the podcast. 24 games for you to pick for today. First, tipping off in 45 minutes from now, you have the America East Championship game between Vermont and UMBC. This is what I had in my America East Tournament Predictions podcast. And I'm going to stand by my pick of Vermont as they're the better team, and they'll advance to the big dance with a double-digit win over UMBC. And Vermont also has the America East Player of the Year on their team. UT Arlington against Louisiana in the Sun Belt semifinal. Give me Louisiana to advance. Cornell Harvard in the Ivy League semifinal. The two Ivy League games are today, and I'll do a quick prediction, my projected prediction for the championship game after I pick the second semifinal. I'm going to take Harvard here. They're the 1 seed, and Cornell's the 4 seed. And Cornell went 14-15 on the year, 6-8 in the conference. Harvard went 17-12 on the year, and 12-2 in conference play. Cornell, by the way, 12-15, not 14-15. So give me Harvard to advance to the Ivy League championship game. Memphis against Cincinnati. Miracle win for Memphis yesterday. They're going to have a letdown here, and I bet Tubby Smith is fired next week. So give me Cincinnati big over Memphis in the AAC semifinal. Alabama, Kentucky in the SEC semifinal. Colin Sexton's been the best player this week in college basketball, but I think they fall short here against Kentucky as Alabama will settle for an at-large. So give me Kentucky there. St. Joe's against Rhode Island in the A-10 semifinal. Give me Rhode Island. They're the best two players on the court. They're the better team. NC Central against Hampton in the MEAC final. Give me Hampton to move on to the big dance. Arkansas against Tennessee in the other SEC semifinal. Give me Tennessee in a close one. Georgia Southern against Georgia State in the Sun Belt semifinal. Give me Georgia State. And they have the Sun Belt Player of the Year on their team. Yale against Penn in the Ivy League semifinal. In the second one, give me Penn with the home court. Yale went 16-14 on the year. And nine and 5 in conference play. Penn went 22-8 on the year, 12-2 in conference play. I think Yale wins here. And in your championship game, I have Penn against Harvard. Best two teams in the conference. I'm going to say the Quakers of Penn win because of home court advantage with the tournament being held at the Palestra. So give me the Penn Quakers to go to the big dance. Houston against Wichita State in today's semifinal for the AAC. Give me Wichita State. They're just a better team than Houston. Davidson, St. Bonaventure in the A-10 semifinal. Give me St. Bonaventure. Although the best player on the court, it's debatable between Peyton Aldridge of St. Bonaventure of Davidson and Jalen Adams of St. Bonaventure. I think Adams is on the better team. So give me St. Bonaventure to advance to the Atlantic 10 championship game. Texas Southern against Arkansas's Pine Bluff in the SWAC final. Give me Texas Southern to go to the big dance. Big 12 title game, West Virginia, Kansas. Kansas defeated West Virginia 2 times this season. West Virginia probably should have won both games. They blew big leads late, both at home and at Allen Fieldhouse. And the best player on the court on paper would be Devontae Graham, who was the Big 12's Player of the Year. But West Virginia, I think, has re-hit its stride. And I like them here in a close game against Kansas to win the Big 12 tournament. Although Kansas is a 1-point favorite. It's funny. Kansas -1, you look at that and say, hey, that's a steal. But listen, I'm taking the Mountaineers If that was Kansas -1 against somebody else, maybe I'd consider it. Or somebody else in the conference like a Texas Tech. But I'm taking the Mountaineers. And to win the Big 12 tournament, maybe Kansas stays on the 1 line even with 8 losses, because I think the Xavier loss puts them to the 2 line. And Duke losing to Carolina opens the door for somebody as well. So give me the Mountaineers as they would end up on the 3 line in theory. San Diego State against New Mexico in the Mountain West Championship game. Tough call here. Give me San Diego State to go to the big dance. Providence against Villanova in the Big East final. Give me Jalen Brunson and Mikal Bridges to lead the way for the Wildcats to win the Big East tournament. In a close one, I think Providence hangs around. Toledo Buffalo in the Mid-American final. The Bulls are just a better team, so give me the Bulls to go to the big dance. Eastern Washington against Montana in the Big Sky final. Montana's the better team, so give me Montana. ACC final, North Carolina, Virginia. Boy, this is the biggest game of the night and can determine a bunch of things along the bracket. Tough call here. Give me the Tar Heels to win this game, as the committee would strongly consider the Tar Heels as a 1 seed if they were to win this game. I'm picking the Tar Heels and Luke May and Joel Berry and Cameron Johnson to lead the way for the Tar Heels here. So give me the Tar Heels in a close one over the Cavaliers. Marshall against Western Kentucky in the CUSA final. Give me Western Kentucky. Stephen F. Austin against Southeastern Louisiana in the Southland final. Give me Southeastern Louisiana. USC Arizona in the Pac-12 final. I think this is going to be a close game. But give me DeAndre Ayton and company to win this tournament to make themselves an interesting 2 or 3 seed case. Grand Canyon against New Mexico State in the Western Athletic Conference final. Easy pick here with New Mexico State. They're just the better team. Cal State Fullerton against UC Irvine in the Big West final. Give me UC Irvine in a close one as they'll go to the big dance. Quickly, some college basketball news breaking. Kevin Ollie out in UConn. The news broke as I started this podcast. This is not a surprise to me with some looming scandals or possible scandals going on with the program. They've been an underachiever since they won the championship in 2014. And I'm fascinated to see what they do. I would love for them to hire Gino Auriemma and steal him from the women's team. Because I think Gino is the best college basketball coach in either men's or women's. And it's debatable whether it's Auriemma, Krzyzewski, John Calipari. But I think the best coach in college basketball is UConn women's is Gino Auriemma. And I think that would be ballsy of the UConn to do that. But it's just a fun fantasy proposition. A lot of interesting candidates out there. I could see them contacting Xavier's Chris Mack or maybe Ed Cooley of Providence. And maybe some up-and-coming coaches like a Greg Marshall of Wichita State, although that would be kind of ballsy for Marshall, considering that Wichita and UConn are in the same conference now. Another one would be... There's a lot of good candidates out there. Kermit Davis of Middle Tennessee is a good one. Steve Forbes of East Tennessee State. And those are the few that I can name on the top of my head right now as viable candidates for UConn. And the other day, Pittsburgh fired Kevin Stallings. I forgot to mention that on yesterday's podcast. Not surprised. They went 0-18 in conference play this season. And then they lost their ACC tournament game as well. Kevin Stallings is a nice coach. And it was funny because he was about to be fired from Vanderbilt. And he ended up going to Pitt because Jamie Dixon left for TCU. And they have to hit it with this hire. They need to take a chance on an up-and-comer like a Kermit Davis or a Steve Forbes. So we'll see what Pitt does. I'm going to recap last night's NBA action real quick. ESPN did not have a doubleheader last night because all the college basketball was on the mothership. That is ESPN last night. So NBA TV had the doubleheader. The Pistons beat the Bulls 99-83. The Pistons had to win that game because the Bulls are tanking. And they need to make that push for the 8th seed. Like, they got to be playing more desperate. The Pacers defeated the Hawks 112-87. Much needed win for the Pacers. And the Rockets' 17-game winning streak is over. The Toronto Raptors defeated the Rockets 108-105, which was an absolute classic of a game for a regular season game. I'm surprised this game wasn't on NBA TV. The Bucks defeated the Knicks 120-112 in the much-needed win for the Bucks. The Jazz defeated the Grizzlies 95-78, much-needed win for the Jazz. Wizards defeated the Pelicans 116-97. Impressive win for Washington going to New Orleans and defeating the Pelicans. The Nuggets defeated the Lakers 125-116. Big win for the Nuggets to keep their hopes at a playoff spot alive. The Trailblazers defeated the Warriors 125-108. The Kings defeated the Magic 94-88. And the Clippers defeated the Cavs 116-102. Impressive win for the Clippers to keep themselves in the conversation for the 8th spot. In that Blazers-Warriors game, that was the second time in this past month that the Trailblazers defeated the Warriors. The Trailblazers are the 3rd seed in the West as we speak. I think Damian Lillard should be talked about as an MVP candidate, but not on the James Harden, LeBron James level, but like on that second tier with Anthony Davis. But Davis might be on that first tier with the way he's carrying that Pelicans team. But Damian Lillard should be in that conversation with like Jimmy Butler and Giannis Antetokounmpo and guys like that. Tonight's games: Suns Hornets, Wizards Heat, Grizzlies Mavericks. Saturday primetime is Spurs at the Thunder. I love Oklahoma City at home. They laid an egg against the Rockets last time they were on national TV. The Spurs don't have Kawhi Leonard. So give me Oklahoma City. I won't be surprised if they win this game by double digits. And then you have the Magic at the Clippers. That's it for your NBA slate for tonight. Couple big NFL moves that happened yesterday. The Cleveland Browns. Yes, the Cleveland Browns traded for Jarvis Landry of the Miami Dolphins. They traded 2 picks to get him. Great trade for the Browns. And they followed up by trading for Tyrod Taylor. And they sent back a 3rd-round pick to Buffalo. I think that's a great trade for both teams. In case the Browns pick a quarterback with one of their 2 picks in the top 4, they redshirt that quarterback for a year. And Tyrod Taylor in a contract year. Great. And then for Buffalo, getting a 3rd-round pick for Taylor, I think, is great value for Buffalo. Aqib Talib was traded from the Broncos to the Rams. Good deal on both sides. This makes the Rams secondary better. And on the flip side, the Broncos clear cap space to potentially go out and sign Kirk Cousins. The Browns made another trade. They traded for Demarius Randall of the Green Bay Packers as the Packers get DeShone Kizer in return. DeShone Kizer will back up Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. That's an upgrade over Brent Hundley. And Randall makes the Browns secondary better. The Browns still have a ton of cap space. They'll improve their team in free agency, which begins on Wednesday. And it should be very fascinating. I'll do a podcast next week to preview it and make some predictions for key players. So this should be interesting. And I'll be back tonight recapping some of these afternoon games. And I'll pick the championship games for the SEC and the Sun Belt and the Ivy League and the AAC. And I think there's one more semifinal. Oh, yeah, those are the 4. Because the Big Ten used to be this weekend, or was this weekend. It'll be back to... The Big Ten will be played on Selection Sunday next year, but they just did that a week earlier this year so they could play at the Garden. So I'll be back tonight, folks, recapping some of these afternoon games, picking some of these games for tomorrow, and then pick a couple NBA games for tomorrow as well. I hope you guys have a nice